Hello and welcome to another one of my videos. In this one we're going to be looking at musical instruments. Recently I did a video on making clamps, luthier's clamps, and someone suggested I should do a video on the repair of that guitar I was working on, but it's fixed already. And so I thought, well, I found this piece of a guitar in the street and I thought, well, it'd be really cool to have a go at making the rest of the body from scratch. And so I did a bit of research and I thought, well, a guitar is a fairly big project, and so I thought, let's do something smaller, maybe a ukulele. But I found after I got started and learned a fair bit that a ukulele is really just a small guitar with only 4 strings, and so it's just about as much work. I learned a lot while I was doing it, and I can say I am not a luthier, so please forgive me all the luthiers out there for my methodology, but it works for me. So let's have a look at how I made it. For the front and back I'll need some reasonable looking timber, and I think I can get something reasonable out of this old skirting board here. It's a decent colour, or maybe from this piece of an old cupboard, I think it was. And it needs to be planed down to a thickness of 2 millimeters, or approximately 1/16 of an inch. And just clamping it, and then cut them to length, straighten the edges up and get rid of that old paint. So there are no gaps between those boards, like that. Then on one of them I'm going to get another stick here and place it underneath the joint of that to raise it angled. In these 2 planks, or 2 bits of board here, I've placed a nail at each end. That raises that up. Then I'm going to nail another nail here, and another one here, so that when I take that little board out, glue up the edges, they should go down tightly like that. The weight on top should glue it nicely. So any small lips that have appeared there, we can either plane them off very finely or with a scraper, in this case, and some sandpaper. And there we have the back, the boards for the back and the front. Now, bending the sides was probably the most difficult part for me, the trickiest. I went to the trouble of splitting a board, planing it down, only to have it fail on me in the bending of it. Thought I had it right, but I had to do at least a half a dozen experiments before I finally came up with an understanding of how it works and a better technique. Now, the first thing you're going to need is your ukulele shape, which I've cut out of ply and then doubled it so that you now have the ukulele shape. Then you're going to have to make a mold so that the sides can be bent and fitted into that mold. In this case here, I made one out of just junk MDF there, or not MDF, or chipboard or whatever, and pegged together of the thickness that I want it. And in this case, I can pull the pegs here and it will come apart so that I can take things in and out. I'm going to try another way of doing the mold here if you don't have a lot of chipboard lying around. I'm going to take the plywood shape that I made and make 4 of those, then sandwich them between with some bits of stick to give me that rounded form. Let's see how that works for me. Now, really I should use a split a plank and plane it down to 2 millimeters is what they're specifying, but I found that's particularly really stiff. For a guitar I definitely would, but a ukulele has to go around some tighter curves, and so I would go a little bit thinner. And so instead of doing that, I'm going to save myself some time by taking an old piece of wall here and using a 3-ply plywood and shave off the top and the bottom, leaving the centerpiece, which is roughly 1 to 1.5 millimeters, which I think is a little bit better. Now the top layer is across the grain, so I'm going to get a plank with the grain running the full length. Well, in the case of that piece of ply, that turned out at 2 millimeters, so that's what we need. Now the results of that are fairly stiff, and I will be bending that with heat, but it's going to be fairly difficult to bend that with heat. But I found a method which is pretty cheap and budget, but it works, is instead of going across the grain with cutting a piece of 3-ply, is cut it the lengthways and then plane off the outside ply, so that now you've got a 2-ply with strengthening going this way and a very thin veneer going the other way, so it will bend very easily, and you can even get away with getting it into the mold without even heating it. That is a very cheap budget way of doing. Obviously not very high quality, but it works if you're doing something, say, for learners or something like that. Obviously this is a better method, with it lengthways being stiffer, and better still is getting a plank, cutting it down and then thicknessing it is even better quality. But that still works for me. Now the trick to getting this to bend is keeping it moist but heating it to about 150 degrees Celsius. Unfortunately, at 150 degrees, at 100 degrees, the water evaporates. So it's a little bit of a battle between trying to keep it moist yet get it hot enough. But when it does get to 130 to 150, the fibers will start to relax. So I've got a tin can here, heated, and there it's bent just a little bit. And the idea is to keep it moist with a spray bottle and get it hot enough and slowly encourage it to bend. And there it's just relaxing a little bit. And by the time it relaxes, it'll probably have dried out a little bit. So a bit more water and some more. And little by little we can get it to bend to the shape that we want it to. Now it helps to have a form in negative of the shape of the ukulele side, and using the stick with some string and things, pull it into that shape so that when it cools down and dries it will stay in that shape. Now while it's on there we can continue heating it and bending it around very carefully. So there I have it, nicely bent. The hardest part was around this tight curve here, of course, but taking it very slowly and carefully managed to do it. So I'm going to leave that sitting to let it cool down and dry out, probably a day or so, and that will generally keep its shape to go into the other mold. So there it is in the mold, nice and dry, and even now I'm going to trim off the ends flush so that when I put the mold together it will join up. The next thing to do is to put the end blocks here. A block here and at the top and one at the bottom, or top and bottom. And they'll need to be slightly curved to fit exactly the shape of the ukulele. Now the proper and the fancy way of joining the neck to the body is a tapered mortise and tenon joint. So that means that the block that you're going to put in there has to be deep enough to be able to make that mortise joint. So with a template here of the right angle, I'm going to then measure that slot there and the angle there, which would then transfer to the neck there and there. But even though that's so fancy, I think it's fairly excessive for a ukulele, so I'm just basically going to use a block like that and screw it through. A little bit more budget, but for me it works. Now, while those blocks dry, we can prepare the fretting, which are some long sticks. I've taken a block of wood with a screw, filed that off so that the edges are sharp, adjusted it to the depth I want, and now I can score a line along my stick on two faces to then plane that stick to the right thickness. So there we have the stick nice and even. Now I'm going to put it on a bench hook here so that I am going to cut it. Now I've taken a hacksaw blade, attached it to a stick with some screws at the right depth so that I'm going to make some cuts in the stick. So by the time it hits the stick here, it's gone to the depth. It's a depth gauge, so that I'm going to cut not quite through. And also here I have a nail, so that on the last cut here, move it sideways and it will give you the distance for the next cut. So that we get a series of cuts so that it makes it nice and flexible the length of the stick. Then we're going to glue that into the edges of the body. And also clamp it in there with lots of little clamps. So there we have it all together, and we also have a lid, and we also have a back. Now because they're made of strips and it's very thin, it's going to need some support, and we can do that by putting some sticks across at the appropriate places to give it support this way and also help hold it in that way. Now structurally you can, for the cheaper ones, you can make them rectangular, but it's generally a nicer idea to do them triangular so that they're a little bit lighter but just as strong. So let's get some sticks and shave them down with the plane. Now for the back, we're going to put one for the big fat bulge, one to hold the smaller bulge, and one right in the center. But for the front, we have to think about the hole that's going here, so we can't put that one there. And also we have to think of the bridge needing some support. So we're going to move that up a little bit. So we're only going to have 2 for the front, plus some down here, which we'll show you just later. And also 3 for the back. Just 2 for the front and 3 for the back. Now, many new luthiers will measure everything precisely and glue those ribs onto the fronts and backs first before putting them onto the sides. That's so that they can tune particularly the top, but sometimes the back, and they can tune it by putting these flutings here with a chisel. Depending on how long and short they are, that will affect the resonance of the top particularly, and sometimes the back, so that they can get it sounding absolutely perfect. Now, I'm not quite that tense myself, so I prefer to do it a little bit more industrially, and according to a video in the Philippines, you can do it by gluing that into the body first before putting the lids on. So I'm just going to clamp that in there, measure back a little bit, and then flute it with the chisel. So I'm going to use a knife just to score that and then cut into it, or better still even with a chisel to take out a small notch so that we can kind of sink that into there and glue it and let that dry. The next thing to do is to sand it all flat to be able to glue the top on. I'm using about a 60 grit sandpaper on a piece of board, and all over I'm going to be making it as flat as possible. I'm going to apply some glue to all the surfaces and put the lid on, or the top. So we have the top gluing on. While that's drying, let's turn our attention to the neck. I'm going to take a board that's about a 2 centimetre, like, you know, what's that, almost an inch, and I'm going to need around about 50 millimetres wide. So I'm going to strip that, and I'm going to need at least 23 centimetres of length for that neck, so I'll give it about 25, somewhere around there, and then I'm going to come back about 10 centimetres and cut it on an angle. So that will make my neck. Then we've got room for the head, and then some extra for building up the neck where it joins to the body. So let's cut that out. I'm going to clamp one on top of the other so I can just clean up the surfaces there before gluing. So there I have the head upside down, clamped in so it gives me this angle. Then at the other end, with the bits of plank left over, made a little tower for the bit that's going to go against the ukulele. Then let that dry. The next thing I will do is put a bridge support block onto the lid, which is down there on the 2, not the 3 ribbed ones, and 3 little ribs to give support to this bottom area. Now I'm going to decide on the neck where I'm going to have my nut, which is the end of the fretboard here, and come back 23 centimetres, which is there, for the length of the neck to the body, and then square that across and down, trim it off. Now on the end here I'm going to find the centre, and then from the outside point I'm going to give it a 20-degree angle. It's arbitrary really, you could make it fluted or curved or pointy or whatever. This is the artistic piece, but this is the face that's going to join to the ukulele. Then we can cut it and rasp it and file it around artistically to make that bit. I'm also going to give it the profile, the curve of it too, roughly now, only all very roughly at the moment. And at the top end also I'm going to give it that profile. And then with a spoke shave, remove that edge there to make it roughly the length we need. So now we're going to take the neck and we're going to align it and attach it. But before I do that, I'm going to have to trim that off flush and around there, and with some sandpaper just sand it flush so that the neck is flush with the top of, or the top of the ukulele. Now with a piece of string I'm going to put it down at the end, centre up here, and then get this lined up, and then put a block on the table and clamp it so that I now have the alignment that I want. I'm going to get some paper and some chalk and chalk up the paper a bit, put it between there and the body, and then pull it so that it's now got a mark there, and then I know that's where I need to file or sand down. So when you're getting the chalk covering just about the whole face of it with the rasp, well then you can put a nice gritty piece of sandpaper in there, apply a little bit of pressure, and pull it through a few times until you've got it perfectly flush and aligned. So I'm just going to partially screw those screws in just to make a mark, and then out again to know where I'm going to do a couple of pilot holes. Do a dry fit without glue just to make sure everything's fitting and aligning as it should before you take it apart and put it back together with glue. Now, if you're concerned about people seeing those screws through the sound hole, you can put a glue veneer on top of it. Before we put the back on, I'm probably going to trim a lot of this off and then sand it back with my sanding stick, and also make sure that at the front is flush. Now, I tried doing this with a flush cutting router bit, but I found it was so aggressive it tended, particularly on these end grains, to chip pieces out. So it was much safer to use a nice rough grit on a stick and grind through it quickly. Much safer. I'm just going to sign this before page step 007 before I turn it over and glue the back on. While that's drying, we can look at doing the frets. Now, on any stringed instrument, you're going to have a string, of course. Halfway on the ukulele is going to be one octave and then another octave. Then you've got your hole here and your body shape, like that. And the octave there is divided into 12 notes. You cannot just divide those into 12 even spaces, because as you move up the string it gets tighter and you have to allow for that. And so the spaces at one end are wider than the other at the other end, and it's a logarithmic one. Now, the way they figure that out is this really horrible sort of mathematics thing that says 12 to the power of 2 something rather. That horrible thing. Can you understand math? I don't much. But it means that the square root of 2, 12 to the square root of 2. Now, that's basically, it means what you can do is your string length, say we've got 405 millimeters, it means that first piece here, the first fret, is going to be around about 94.4% of the length of the string. So if we take 405 millimeters, divide it and find 94.4, that's approximately 25.2 millimeters or something. So we know it is there. We now know that that's the first fret. Now, because that gets smaller and smaller, it is a logarithmic progression. So we draw a line, a perpendicular line from the top of the fretboard, and draw a straight line to the other end. Then with a compass we go up there and then do a circle, and it will give us to the first one. Then we draw another perpendicular line, reset the compass, and go down to the next one. Go perpendicular, reset your compass, and go down there. Now, because this line is shrinking, the distance between there is taking off about 0.6% of that number every time. So they get less and less and less and less until you get 12. Now, if you want to be precise, make sure that at halfway, the 12th fret is going to exactly hit there. Now, if it doesn't quite hit there, well, I can shift this point by exactly half the amount. I mean, so that it is exactly half even. And that is slightly variable for our purposes anyway. If you're a luthier and a perfectionist, you will make sure that 12th fret falls at exactly halfway. So you recalculate, redo that until you got it perfect, and then keep going down to as many frets as you need, around about 20 something, is it? Not sure. Anyway, as many as you need, and that's how you're going to calculate it. So let's do that now. And that's good. I'm only 3 millimeters out, so I could either redo that, which I won't, or I'll just shift my my bridge point 3 millimeters. And I may even take one off this end to adjust for the open string adjustment. So that's close enough for me. So there we have our frets worked out, and I'm going to shift that 2 millimeters and that 1 millimeter just to compensate for my errors. And then I have a little board for the fretboard here. It's the same width as the neck of the ukulele, and I will taper it from 50 millimeters down to 40 here. Next thing is to transfer those lines onto the board. Now, I did buy some fretting wire. It's a T profile wire with a bit down there with some barbs, but I don't have a saw that is fine enough to slot that into tightly. Even a hacksaw blade is too thick because it has a wobble in it when a curve, to give it the curve, it has a wobble, so that's quite fat. So what I did, I got an oil stone and I ground off those wobbles on both sides. I attached it to a stick and then I planed down successively the piece of wood until I got to a depth that my fret is going to sit into. So then I got it down thin enough and straight enough. So now I can put a right-angled guide on there, a board, clamp it on, and then with the saw make my saw cuts until the stick bottoms out and I know I've got it the right depth. I'm going to taper it a little bit. So the fretboard is going to go on there, and here is our 12th fret, I think it is, and there will be exactly double that distance will be the bridge there, and then there'll be the hole in the middle. I'll clean up the snip off the ends and file them up and sand them so they're nice and smooth on the ends. Also, I'll taper the neck to go with that, and the hole here I will cut with a hole cutter, which is basically a knife that I've made out of a blade, sharpened it, and a block of wood with the right distance between the point of that screw and the knife. The point will go in the centre of the hole, it'll spin around, and carefully cutting the hole. So there I've cleaned up all the frets and got the fretboard glued on. Now it's glued, I can now calculate exactly where I'm going to put my bridge, the nut, the string tensioners, and also I'll continue just reducing that neck there so that it's in line with the fretboard and with a good profile underneath. I've marked out the head here where I'm going to trim it off, and also 4 holes of the appropriate size to take the tuners that I bought, 4 of them. Now, on other ones you don't have to use tuners, you can make pegs if you can't afford the tuners, and they are conical shape of 1 in 25 but that works as well if you wanted to do it that way. Now the bridge, there are many various different ways of doing it depending on the complexity and how far you want to go. The easiest way is just a block here. For smaller ukuleles is enough, and it'll just stick on with a raised lip on the block to make the bridge. But this is a little bit more complicated. It has a groove to put either a stick, some plastic, or in this case a piece of bone. At the back I've made some slots and a slot under here so that when I put a knot in the end of the nylon, it will slot into the groove and into the back groove and be trapped there and then rise onto the bridge. It's also flanged out a little bit wider, so it's got a little bit more area for it to stick down, so it's not likely to come off so much. The more fancy ones will have a groove down here and drill holes through there to feed the string through to come around and wrap around itself. I don't have a drill that fine for the moment, so I think this will work for me. And if we were to string it up at the other end, it's starting to make some sound. At this end of the net I've put a little groove here so that you can do either a bone, plastic, or I want to do it with a little piece of dark hardwood to make the nut there, glue it in place, and make the grooves along the top so that the string can go onto that and tension up. Now comes the part of lots of sanding before we varnish it. So there we have it. I could put a lot more coats of varnish on there to make it nice and shiny and everything, but what's more important than how it looks is how it sounds. I just put some generic nylon from the hardware store on there. The proper strings are going to be better, of course, and also they'll go out of tune for the first few days or so excuse that. And what's it sounding like? I have here on my second fret here is a little bit high, so it's got a bit of a buzz. And I'll have to level it off, so that will fix that. But the sound of it is not bad. Sort of like some harmonics there, but not a bad sound, I suppose. And what does it sound like? Not bad. Not bad for a homemade ukulele.